You two were
Sometimes
fantastic in that
fame
last
looks
take.
bright
Thanks,
from far
Keanu. That
away,
means a lot.
but up
Keep
close
that
it can
energy up
feel
for the
like
next
walking
scene.
through a
Thanks.
storm with
The
too
key
many
is
eyes
vulnerability.
watching.
Let it show. How do you
This is the
practice
story
that?
of
By
three
being
young
honest with
actors who
yourself
thought they were
first. That
chasing the
makes sense.
spotlight,
You two were
and instead
fantastic in
found
that
a
last
quiet
take.
Thanks,
guide
Keanu.
standing
That means
just
a lot.
outside of it.
Keep that energy up for the next
The
scene.
first time Eli
Thanks.
stepped onto a real
Great to see you
Hollywood
all.
set,
You too.
his
What a
hands would not
perfect
stop
day.
shaking.
Yeah, let's go.
He
So,
hid
what's
them in
the
the
plan?
pockets of his
This way.
worn denim
The
jacket,
key is
pretending
vulnerability.
he
Let
was
it
just
show.
cold,
How do you
not
practice
terrified.
that? By being
At
honest with
22,
yourself first.
fresh from
That
a
makes
small
sense.
town and
You two
3
were
years of
fantastic
failed
in that last
auditions,
take.
Thanks,
this one
Keanu. That
scene
means
on
a
a
lot.
mid-budget
Keep that
action
energy
film
up for the
felt
next
like
scene.
his last
Thanks.
chance. If
Great
he
to
messed
see
it
you
up,
all.
he was
You
sure the
too.
city
What a
would
perfect
finally
day.
spit
Yeah,
him out.
let's go.
So, what's the
Around
plan?
him,
This way.
cameras rolled
You two
on
were
dollies,
fantastic in
crew
that last
members
take.
shouted
Thanks,
over each
Keanu.
other,
That means a
and
lot.
every light
Keep that
seemed
energy up for
aimed
the next
directly
scene.
at his
Thanks.
insecurity.
The key is
He tried to
vulnerability. Let
breathe,
it show.
but
How do
every
you
breath
practice
tasted
that?
like
By being
fear.
honest with yourself first.
Lena,
That makes
standing a
sense.
few feet
You
away
two
in
were
costume,
fantastic in that
watched him
last
with the
take.
practiced
Thanks,
calm
Keanu.
of
That means a
someone who had
lot.
already been
Keep that
burned by
energy up
hope.
for the next scene.
She was only
Thanks.
21, but her
Great
eyes
to see
carried
you
the
all.
weight of
You
a long
too.
list
What
of
a perfect
almosts.
day.
Yeah, let's go.
Almost cast,
So, what's the
almost
plan?
called back,
This way.
almost
The
famous.
key is
Her agent had
vulnerability.
warned
Let
her,
it show.
this
How do you
shoot is
practice
important.
that? By
Don't
being
fade
honest
into
with
the
yourself
background
first.
again.
That makes sense.
So she
You
straightened
two
her
were
spine,
fantastic in
fixed
that
her
last take.
smile, and
Thanks,
forced
Keanu.
herself
That means
to
a
look
lot.
like she belonged.
Keep that energy up for the next scene.
Inside,
Thanks.
her chest hurt
Great to
from
see you
holding
all.
back
You
the memory
too.
of
What
her
a perfect
parents
day.
selling
Yeah,
their
let's
car
go.
to pay for
So,
her
what's the
move
plan?
to Lowe's
This way.
Angels. She couldn't afford another disappointment, not for them and not for herself. On the other side of the set, Marco stretched his shoulders, trying to loosen the stiffness that came from pretending he wasn't completely out of his depth. He was 24, a former college athlete who traded a promising sports career for the dream of acting after an injury ended everything. Directors liked his look, his build, his quiet intensity, but once the cameras started rolling, doubt always showed up like an uninvited guest. He knew people whispered that he'd gotten this role because of his face, not his talent. Every time he heard the word lucky, it felt like an accusation, not a compliment. All 3 of them were hired as supporting roles, background to the film's legendary lead, an actor whose name had filled their childhood movie nights and whose posters still hung in dorm rooms around the world. They had grown up watching him dodge bullets in slow motion, deliver lines that turned into quotes, and disappear into characters that felt more real than people they actually knew. On paper, working with him was a dream. In reality, it felt like being dropped into the deep end with no idea how to swim. The director called for rehearsal. Eli missed his mark twice in a row, each mistake tightening a knot in his stomach. The third time he delivered his single line too fast, his voice cracking halfway through. A quiet chuckle rose from somewhere near the monitors. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut straight through him. He stared at the ground, cheeks burning, convinced that at any second someone would tap his shoulder and ask him to step aside. This, he thought, is the moment my dream finally dies. Lena watched him stumble and felt a familiar sting in her own chest. She knew the taste of public embarrassment, the way it could linger for months and show up later in every new audition. The director's jaw tightened, the assistant director checked his watch, and somewhere behind them a producer muttered something about time is money. The air on set changed, less electric, more tense, like everyone had silently agreed that the new kid was a problem they didn't have time to fix. Lena's instincts told her to look away to protect herself, to avoid being associated with failure. Instead, she found herself taking a small step closer, like her body moved before her mind could stop it. Marco felt the tension too, that sudden invisible wall that goes up around someone who's struggling. He'd seen it on his team back in college. When a player started missing every shot, people stopped passing them the ball. No one wanted to be dragged down. Part of him wanted to stay focused on his own performance to keep his head down and survive the day. He had rent due, medical bills waiting, and a career that still felt like a fragile experiment. Yet there was something about the way Eli's shoulders collapsed that hit too close to home, reminding him of all the moments he'd felt like a mistake in someone else's plan. The director lifted his hand to reset the scene, impatience clear in the tightness of his voice. Before he could speak, a calm presence stepped quietly between the camera and the chaos. The set seemed to exhale all at once as the lead actor, the man whose films had filled their teenage years, walked over not with the swagger of a star but with the easy, almost shy warmth of someone arriving late to a small gathering. He didn't ask for makeup, didn't call for his assistant, didn't look at the clock. Instead, he stopped right in front of Eli, close enough that the younger actor could see a few strands of gray in his beard. and the faint, tired kindness in his eyes. He didn't raise his voice, didn't address the crew, didn't turn it into a performance. He just spoke to Eli quietly like they were the only two people on the lot. "You okay?" he asked, his tone soft, almost like a friend checking in after a long day. The question was so simple, so human that it broke something open inside Eli. All the lines he'd rehearsed, all the defenses he'd built to survive in this city, scattered in an instant. He nodded quickly, then shook his head, then tried to apologize, words tumbling over each other in a rush of shame. Around them, everything went oddly still. The entire set pulled toward this small, quiet moment. The director shifted uneasily. The crew glanced at each other, and Lena and Marco watched with their hearts caught somewhere between hope and fear, realizing this was no longer just another take. Something unexpected was happening, something that could either save Eli or cost all of them far more than they imagined. Marco had seen legends before, from the sidelines of big games and from the back row of movie theaters, but never from this close. Standing a few feet away, he watched the older actor's shoulders, not his face, not his fame, but the way his posture softened slightly as he focused on Eli. There was no irritation there, no hint of the frustration everyone else felt. It looked more like concern, the same kind of concern Marco remembered from the one coach who believed in him after his injury. For a moment, the noise of the set dimmed, and Marco's heartbeat grew louder than the generators humming in the background. "Let's take 5, the actor said, not loudly, but with a quiet assurance that made the director hesitate, then reluctantly nod. Crew members drifted away toward coffee, makeup artists checked their kits, and the tense circle around Eli finally loosened. Eli, still standing on his mark, looked confused, like he wasn't sure if this break was for everyone or just a polite way of giving him space to fall apart. The older actor didn't move toward his trailer, didn't walk off to check his phone. Instead, he stepped closer to Eli and gently guided him to the edge of the set, near a stack of Apple boxes where the light was softer and the noise thinned into a distant buzz. Lena watched them go, torn between curiosity and fear. She wanted to move closer to hear every word, but some small, panicked part of her worried she'd be intruding. She'd been on enough sets to know how quickly you could be labeled needy or unprofessional for being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Yet as she saw Eli's hunched shoulders and the way his hands still trembled, she felt something tug at her. This wasn't gossip. This was survival. So she pretended to examine her script, inching toward them until she was close enough to catch fragments of their conversation. "You know," the older actor said, sitting on an apple box and motioning for Eli to sit on another, "first time I was on a real set, I forgot my lines so badly they had to cut for lunch." His voice held a soft humor, but there was no mockery in it, only memory. Eli blinked, startled, his eyes reddened with embarrassment. "You," he whispered like the idea was impossible. The man nodded slowly. "Yeah, I thought they'd fire me on the spot." Spent the whole lunch break in the bathroom, rehearsing one sentence and trying not to throw up. A small, disbelieving laugh escaped Eli's throat. It sounded shaky but real. "What did they do?" he asked. The actor smiled faintly, the kind of smile that came from years of surviving moments like this. "They didn't fire me, they just waited for me to breathe." He paused, letting the words settle. "The thing is, you're not failing, you're just scared. Fear makes everything louder, every light, every camera, every whisper. But the scene doesn't need you to be fearless, it just needs you to be honest." Marco pretended to stretch nearby, close enough to hear every sentence. He'd always believed that the people at the top were built differently, born with some unshakable confidence he'd never managed to find. Hearing this man talk about forgetting lines, about hiding in bathrooms to rehearse, shook something loose inside him. Maybe courage wasn't the absence of fear. Maybe it was learning to move with it, like playing through an injury because the game mattered more than the pain. He looked down at his hands, remembering all the times he'd almost walked away from acting, because the fear felt bigger than the dream. Lena leaned against a light stand, her script forgotten. She was struck by how gently the older actor spoke, how he never once said, "It's not a big deal," or "You'll be fine," the way people always did when they didn't really understand. Instead, he let the fear be real. He acknowledged it, turned it over carefully, as if it were something fragile that deserved respect. Lena thought about her parents, about the way her mother had hugged her so tightly before she boarded the bus to Lowe's Angels, whispering, "Promise me you'll be kind to yourself." She hadn't kept that promise. She'd been her own harshest critic, never allowing herself to be scared, only weak or not good enough. Now, listening to this quiet conversation, she wondered if she'd been wrong all along. "You don't have to prove you belong here in one take," the actor continued, his voice steady. "You just have to show up, listen, and tell the truth with your eyes. The rest, it comes with time and mistakes, a lot of them." He chuckled softly, like he was remembering specific ones, whole chapters of his life built out of failure and persistence. Eli wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand, embarrassed but a little calmer. "What if I mess it up again?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then we do it again," the actor replied simply. "And again, and as many times as it takes. That's not weakness, that's the job." He leaned in slightly, his gaze kind but serious. "But I need you to promise me something, all right?" Eli nodded quickly, like he was gripping the last rope in a storm. "Promise me you won't decide who you are based on one bad moment. This business will try to define you by your worst day or your biggest mistake. Don't help it. Hold on to your own story. Even when it's hard." The weight of that sentence hung in the air, reaching farther than just Eli. Lena felt it land in her chest like a stone dropped into deep water, rippling through memories of harsh, casting feedback and cruel online comments. Marco felt it too, as if someone had finally put words to the quiet war he fought inside his head every time he stepped in front of a camera. For a second, it seemed like the whole set leaned in, drawn by a gravity that had nothing to do with fame and everything to do with humanity. The director called out from across the soundstage, his tone a mix of impatience and deference. "We good to go again?" he asked, eyes flicking between the clock and the older actor. Crew members were already drifting back, grips adjusting lights, sound checking levels, the fragile space of that private conversation tightening as the machine of production started up again. Eli took a slow breath, steadier now, but his fingers still twitched nervously around his script. The older actor rose to his feet, gave Eli's shoulder a reassuring squeeze, and glanced past him, right at Lena and Marco. For the first time all day, his gaze took them in fully, as if he had known they were listening the entire time. There was no judgment in his eyes, only a quiet invitation, like he was wordlessly telling them that this moment was theirs too, if they were brave enough to step into it. "Actually," he called out to the director, voice calm but firm, "before we roll again, I'd like to change something about the scene." The murmur that followed cut through the air like a knife. Everyone knew changes meant time, and time meant money. The director frowned, already calculating the cost. Lena and Marco exchanged a quick, uneasy glance, suddenly aware that whatever he was about to suggest could reshape not just the scene, but all of their futures on this set. Lena felt her stomach tighten as the murmur spread across the set. Changes meant risk, and risk usually fell hardest on the people with the least power. She clutched her script, eyes darting between the director and the older actor, half expecting the conversation to turn into one of those quiet arguments that end with someone being replaced. The director stepped forward, hands on his hips, trying to sound casual but not quite hiding his irritation. "What kind of change are we talking about?" he asked. The older actor didn't flinch. He walked back toward the center of the set, his presence steady, unhurried. "Right now, Eli's character comes in, stumbles through his line, and exits," he said, glancing at the young actor beside him. "It plays like a throwaway moment, but this scene is about the hero realizing he can't do everything alone, right?" He waited for the director's reluctant nod. "So what if instead the kid hesitates and the others step in? We give them real choices, real stakes. A small moment of courage, not just background movement." Lena's breath caught. The others meant her and Marco. She flipped through the pages as if the answer might suddenly appear there, but this new version of the scene didn't exist yet. It was being created in real time, right in front of her. Marco's heart hammered in his chest. Improvisation wasn't what he'd signed up for. He liked structure, game plans, clear instructions. This was a free fall. The director rubbed his forehead, already calculating camera angles and time resets. "We've locked the script," he said carefully. "The producers signed off on it. We're shooting tight today, you know that." There was a warning in his tone, a reminder of schedules, contracts, and invisible pressure from people who weren't even on set. But the older actor didn't back down. He tilted his head slightly, voice calm but carrying a quiet weight. "I know. I also know we have something better sitting right here. We have 3 young actors who can turn a throwaway beat into a real moment. That's worth a couple extra minutes, isn't it?" For a long second, it felt like the whole day balanced on the director's next sentence. Lena's throat went dry. If he said no, she would go back to the edges, delivering her single line exactly as written, and this strange, fragile hope would vanish. If he said yes, she'd be thrown into deeper water than she'd ever swum in. Part of her wanted the safety of routine. Another part, the part that had slept on friends' couches and worked night shifts to afford acting classes, begged for the chance. The director sighed, glancing at the script supervisor, then at the distant cluster of producers near the monitors. He finally shrugged, the gesture half surrender, half curiosity. "Fine, we try it your way once," he said. "Just once. If it doesn't work, we go back to the original plan." Around them, the crew sprang into motion again, but now the energy felt different. Less mechanical, more alert. Like everyone sensed that something unexpected was about to happen. "Lena, Marco," the actor called, beckoning them closer. "Can you come here for a second?" Hearing her name spoken by that voice sent a shiver down Lena's spine. She walked over as steadily as she could, though her knees felt like they might fold at any moment. Marco followed, shoulders squared, trying to look calm even as adrenaline surged through him. Up close, the older actor's kindness was almost disarming. He looked at them not like accessories to a scene, but like equals, partners. "So here's what I'm thinking," he said, lowering his voice so only they could hear. "Eli's character freezes on his line. Instead of ignoring it, your characters react. Lena, you step in first, not to save him, but to support him. Maybe you finish his sentence, maybe you tease him just enough to break the tension, something natural, something kind." He turned to Marco. "And you? You're the one who reads the room. You shift the focus, give him a beat to breathe. Maybe you move closer, maybe you say something that grounds everyone. We build the tension, then release it together." Lena swallowed hard. Improvising kindness felt strangely more vulnerable than improvising anger. She knew how to play sharp, cold, guarded, that had been her armor in every audition room. But gentle, supportive, that felt naked, too close to who she really was underneath all the layers of survival. "What if I mess it up?" she asked before she could stop herself. He smiled, and the lines at the corners of his eyes deepened. "Then we find the truth inside the mess," he said softly. "You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be present. We're not here to impress each other. We're here to tell a story together." Marco felt those words settle into him like a weight he actually wanted to carry. Together. No coach had ever said that to him in exactly that way. This wasn't about stealing the scene or proving he belonged. It was about connection, something he'd been missing ever since he left his team and woke up in a city where everyone seemed to be competing for the same tiny spotlight. "I can do that," he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. They took their positions. The camera rolled into place, the slate clapped, and the familiar command echoed through the soundstage. "And action!" The world narrowed to the rectangle of space where they stood. Eli entered first, just like before, but this time his hesitation wasn't a mistake. It was part of the story. He stepped into the light, opened his mouth, and let the fear show. His line came out tangled, half-formed. His eyes flickered in panic, just as they had during the failed takes, but now he didn't rush past it. He stayed inside it. A hush fell over the set. The air felt thick, charged. Lena's cue arrived like a heartbeat, sudden, undeniable. She leaned in, tilting her head just enough to catch his gaze, and a small, almost playful smile tugged at her lips. "I think what he's trying to say is," she improvised, gently finishing his thought with a twist that made their characters feel like they had history, like they'd known each other long before this scene existed. For the first time, her voice didn't sound like it was straining to prove anything. It sounded natural, almost intimate. Eli's shoulders loosened a fraction. A flicker of gratitude passed through his eyes, so quick it would barely register on camera, but the older actor saw it. Marco stepped in then, shifting his stance, drawing a subtle line of protection around them both. "Easy," he added, his tone calm, grounded. "We're all on the same team here." The words weren't in the script, but they might as well have been carved into the heart of the story. Something in the room softened. Even the extras, half distracted a moment before, leaned in, drawn toward the small, honest tension unfolding in front of them. The lead actor entered on his mark, but now the scene felt different around him. Instead of towering over three nervous newcomers, he was stepping into a circle they had already begun to build. He let a beat of silence stretch, his eyes moving from Eli to Lena to Marco. In that pause, his character seemed to assess them, not as disposable side notes, but as people. "Good," he finally said, layering the single word with meaning. "Good as in you handled that. Good as in I see you." Good as in you belong here. The director watched from behind the monitor, his earlier frustration forgotten. The image on the screen was alive in a way it hadn't been during the stiff, earlier takes. This felt messy, human, unpredictable. Real. He leaned forward unconsciously, forgetting to check the time code. The script supervisor scribbled frantically, trying to keep up with the changes, but even she couldn't deny that something special was happening. The scene built steadily, each line feeding into the next with a new kind of rhythm. Fear was still there, in Eli's trembling hands, in the small quiver at the edge of Lena's smile, in the tension tightening Marco's jaw, but now it was part of the story, not something they were trying to hide. They weren't perfect. They were honest. And honesty, it turned out, was magnetic. "Cut," the director called at last, the words slicing through the charged silence. For a moment no one moved. Then almost at once the set erupted into quiet, startled applause. It wasn't a wild, cheering kind of sound, just a spontaneous handful of claps from crew members who had seen thousands of scenes and knew when one of them had landed deeper than expected. Eli stood frozen, as if he didn't quite believe it. Lena pressed a shaking hand to her chest, overwhelmed by the rush of adrenaline and relief. Marco exhaled a laugh he hadn't realized he'd been holding back. He felt lighter, like he'd finally set down a burden he'd carried alone for too long. The older actor didn't bask in the reaction. He simply turned to the three of them, studying their faces with a quiet pride that made Lena's eyes sting. "That," he said softly, "is what happens when you trust each other more than you trust your fear." Before any of them could respond, a voice sliced through the moment from near the monitors. A voice they all recognized from earlier production meetings, sharp and authoritative. One of the producers had stepped forward, expression unreadable, a clipboard tucked under his arm like a verdict. He glanced from the playback screen to the four actors on set, then to the director, his lips pressing into a thin line. "So," the producer said, his tone cool, measured, "are we going to pretend we didn't just rewrite a key scene without approval, or are we going to talk about what this means for the rest of the shoot?" Sometimes the most important battles on a film set don't happen in front of the camera at all. They unfold in those tense, quiet minutes after cut, when people decide whether to protect their comfort or protect something more fragile, like truth. The applause died instantly at the producer's words, leaving a heavy silence in its place. Eli felt his chest clamp shut again, like an invisible hand had wrapped around his ribs. His mind jumped straight to the worst possibilities: reshoots, angry emails, his name quietly crossed off future casting lists. Lena's fingers dug into the sides of her script until the pages bent. She tasted hope for all of 30 seconds. The idea that it could be stripped away before it even had a chance to settle made her throat burn. Marco's jaw tightened. He'd learned long ago that sometimes authority didn't care how well you'd played, only that you played the game their way. The director shifted uneasily, caught between the monitor and the man with the clipboard. "It was just an adjustment," he began, his voice already apologetic. "We can go back to the original if—" "Back," the producer interrupted, gesturing toward the playback screen. The frozen frame showed the four of them locked in that improvised moment of connection, eyes lit with something raw and unplanned. "You changed blocking dialogue, the emotional beat of the whole scene. That's not a tweak, that's a rewrite." His gaze slid to the older actor. "You know this isn't how we run things. We have a schedule, a tone, a plan." The older actor stood calmly, hands relaxed at his sides. He wasn't defensive, but he also didn't shrink. "We didn't break the story," he said, his voice measured. "We found it. Look at the monitor. This version serves the scene better. It gives the leads somewhere real to go later. It gives these three an actual arc. It gives the audience something to feel, not just something to watch." Eli's heart jumped at the word arc. Until now, he hadn't thought of his role as anything more than a line in someone else's paragraph. Lena and Marco exchanged a quick look, some mix of disbelief and gratitude. He didn't have to stand up for them. He could have hit his mark, collected his paycheck, and left them to sink or swim alone. Instead, he was using his weight to pull them toward the surface. The producer didn't soften. "It's not about whether they're good," he replied. "We hired them because we believed they could be good. It's about control. If everyone starts finding the story on their own, we don't have a film, we have chaos." His eyes were sharp, not cruel, but undeniably firm. "We don't have the budget for chaos." The old version of Lena, the one who'd learned to stay small and agreeable, wanted to look at the ground and wait for it all to blow over. But something inside her, something newly awakened by that take, refused to go quiet. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "Sir, with respect, it didn't feel like chaos," she said. "It felt honest. We weren't trying to take over. We were just finally telling the truth that was already in the scene." The producer looked almost surprised to hear her speak. He studied her for a moment, then glanced at Marco. "You agree?" he asked, not as a challenge, but as a test. Marco met his eyes, feeling his pulse thudding in his ears. He remembered the words from earlier, "We're all on the same team here." Now he had to decide if he believed them enough to prove it. "I do," Marco answered, his voice stronger than he felt. "We followed his lead." He nodded subtly toward the older actor. "He didn't ask us to make it about us. He asked us to listen to each other and the scene. It was the first time I didn't feel like I was pretending to be someone I thought you wanted. I just was." The set held its breath. This was the kind of honesty that could either earn respect or end careers. The producer exhaled slowly, rubbing his thumb along the edge of his clipboard as if tracing an invisible line between cost and value. Then he turned back to the director. "Play it again," he said. The director jumped, quickly scrubbing the playback to the beginning. Everyone gathered a little closer to the monitors, makeup, grips, background actors lingering at the edges. The take played out. Eli's faltering start, Lena's gentle improvisation, Marco's grounding presence, the older actor's subtle acknowledgement. None of it was flashy. No big stunt, no dramatic outburst. Just four people trying to be human in front of a machine made to capture truth and sell illusion. As they watched, Eli saw his own fear on the screen, but for the first time he didn't hate it. It wasn't humiliating, it was vulnerable. Real. Lena noticed the tiny moment where her eyes softened as she helped him, something she hadn't even been aware of doing. Marco saw the way his body subtly shifted toward the others, forming an unspoken line of protection. And the older actor watched the whole thing with quiet satisfaction, not because he stole the scene, but because he hadn't. They all shared it. The clip ended. Silence again. The producer stared at the frozen final frame, a close shot of the four of them, the emotional thread between them visible even in stillness. You didn't have to know the script to understand something important was happening there. Across the set, someone's walkie crackled faintly. A grip coughed. Then the producer spoke, his tone different now, not warm but thoughtful. "Print that take," he said, "and flag it as the new version of the scene." Eli nearly swayed on his feet. Lena blinked rapidly, forcing back sudden tears. Marco closed his eyes for a heartbeat, letting the decision sink in. The director nodded slowly, relief and respect mingling on his face. "All right then," he said. "We move forward with this." The producer turned to leave, then paused. "We're not rewriting the whole movie like this," he warned. "We don't have time, but—" he glanced at the three younger actors, then at the older one. "If you can capture that level of truth again in the scenes we already have, I won't stand in the way of something that clearly works." It was the closest thing to a compliment they were ever likely to get from him. When he walked off, the tension on set finally cracked, releasing into a flood of quiet, buzzing energy. Crew members went back to work with a different kind of focus, stealing occasional glances at the three newcomers as if seeing them for the first time. They weren't just faces in the background anymore. They were part of the story, and everyone knew it. Eli let out a shaky breath he felt like he'd been holding since dawn. I thought I was done," he admitted, voice barely audible. "I really thought today was going to prove I didn't belong here." His fingers still trembled, but now it felt less like panic and more like an echo of a storm already passing. The older actor stepped closer, his expression gentle. "You were never done," he said. "You were just at the part where most people quit." He looked at all three of them, his gaze steady, almost fatherly. "This business can be cruel. It can make you think your worth is tied to a single take, a single review, a single tweet. It's not. Your worth is in how you show up, how you treat people when no one's watching, how you keep going when it would be easier to walk away." Lena felt those words anchor deep inside her. She thought of every night she'd gone home from an audition replaying her mistakes, every time she'd called her mother and lied, saying things were great while scrolling through rejection emails. "Why are you doing this?" she asked suddenly, her voice rough. "For us, I mean, you don't have to. You could just act. Hit your marks. You've already made it." He took a moment before answering, as if searching for the most honest version of the truth. Because someone did it for me, he said quietly. When I was your age, I was scared and lost and pretending not to be. There was an older actor on my first real job who took the time to sit with me between takes. He didn't fix everything. He just saw me, reminded me that I was more than my worst day on set. His eyes softened with memory. I promised myself that if I ever had the chance, I'd pass that on, quietly. No headlines, no speeches, just one person at a time. Marco swallowed, emotion thick in his throat. Does it ever get easier? He asked. The fear, the pressure, the feeling that it could all disappear any second. The older actor considered the question, then shook his head just a little. Not in the way you think, he said. There's always another risk, another big scene, another failure waiting somewhere down the line, but you get stronger. You learn you can survive things you thought would break you, and you stop chasing invincibility and start choosing courage instead. They fell quiet, each of them turning that over in their minds. Courage instead of invincibility, kindness instead of competition, presence instead of perfection. These weren't things they'd learned in acting classes or read in how-to books. These were the lessons people usually kept to themselves, guarded like trade secrets. As the crew reset for the next shot, the older actor started to walk toward his mark, then paused. He glanced back at them with a small, almost conspiratorial smile. By the way, he added, what we just did, it wasn't a one-time fluke. You proved you can do it. So now the question is, his eyes moved from Eli to Lena to Marco. What are you going to do with that? Eli straightened a little, the lingering tremor in his hands slowly fading. Lena lifted her chin, a quiet resolve forming behind her eyes. Marco rolled his shoulders back, feeling, for the first time since his injury, like he was part of a team again, even if it was just for the length of a film shoot. Over the days that followed, the quiet mentorship continued, almost invisible from the outside. Between takes, the older actor would share small, practical things. How to breathe through panic before a close-up, how to protect your heart from cruel reviews without turning it to stone, how to say no without burning bridges and yes without losing yourself. He never lectured. He simply talked, listened, and treated their fears like valid companions instead of weaknesses to hide. The three young actors began to change in ways that didn't always show up on camera but could be felt. Eli stopped apologizing before he spoke. Lena stopped dimming her own light so others wouldn't feel threatened. Marco stopped bracing for rejection in every interaction and started looking people in the eye when he shook their hands. The crew noticed. The director noticed. Even the producer, who rarely praised anyone, stopped by one afternoon to say, almost gruffly, "You three. Keep doing whatever you're doing. It's working." Months later, when the film finally premiered, reviewers mentioned the chemistry among the cast, the surprising depth in a few small scenes, the way certain supporting characters popped with unexpected humanity. None of them knew the truth of how those moments were born. There were no behind-the-scenes features about quiet conversations near stacks of Apple boxes, no interviews about mentorship or fear or courage. On paper, it looked like just another movie. But for Eli, Lena, and Marco, it was the line between who they had been and who they were becoming. Years passed. Some of their projects succeeded, some failed. Some roles stretched them, others paid the rent. Sometimes the phone rang, sometimes it stayed heartbreakingly silent. They each had days when walking away felt easier than holding on. Yet whenever doubt pressed too hard, they returned in their minds to that first set, that first day when everything almost fell apart, and then somehow didn't. They remembered a man who could have stayed inside his trailer but chose to step into their fear instead. A man who taught them that kindness was not weakness, that humility could coexist with greatness, and that resilience wasn't about never falling. It was about refusing to let a fall define the rest of your story. And somewhere on another set years later, when a new, trembling young actor forgot a line and the crew shifted uncomfortably, a now seasoned Lena or Marco or Eli would step forward, heart-pounding but voice steady, and say something gentle, something true. Without cameras rolling, without anyone tweeting about it, they would sit on a crate or lean against a wall and quietly pass on the same gift they had once been given. Because beyond the cameras, beyond the posters and the interviews and the red carpets, this was how real legacies were built. Not just through the characters an actor played on screen, but through the lives they quietly lifted up when no one was watching. And that, in the end, was the part of the story that never made it to the credits, but changed everything anyway.